Hello and welcome to another episode of the show. I'm Jenny Mustard and I am here with a very special guest today. I have Caoilinn Hughes on the show. So welcome, Caoilinn.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Caoilinn is a wonderful novelist and an extraordinary short storyist, if that's a word. But we're also good friends. So I'm very happy to have you on the podcast today. And we actually had this thought that because, my second novel has just come out and Caoilinn's paperback edition of her newest novel, The Alternatives, just came out. So we thought, why don't we sort of interview each other in an episode to, because usually we talk about our books privately, but why not also do it publicly?
More fun. Double the trouble.
Yes. So Caoilinn, do you want to start by just maybe introducing yourself and your writing a little bit?
Sure thing. So The Alternatives is my third novel, and it is literary fiction. I guess that's all you read. I've heard you say in podcasts. So
classics and literary fiction, yeah.
And
what about you?
I'm the same. Yes, every so often, someone tries to talk me into reading a murder mystery, and I promise them I will, and I never do. I'm just so greedy for I think the books that call out to me. But so my first novel was called Orchid and the Wasp, and the second was called The Wild Laughter, and I tend to be writing about the moment that we're living in.
And your newest book, The Alternatives, was incredibly well received, like rave reviews, and also you got some pretty amazing endorsement from other authors like Ramona Lam, Louis Kennedy, and also my favorite endorsement is from Hernan Diaz, who I adore his writing, and he says, "I wish I knew how Caoilinn Hughes has managed to write a book of such depth and gravity that is also so gripping and relentlessly funny." And I think that really captures the style of your writing. Do you agree? So you're like, oh yes.
It was ridiculously kind to say that. Yeah, he's such a great author, because I don't know if you have this. I think the authors that I admire the most are the ones who can pull off tricks that I don't think I could pull off. He's written a very mythical novel called Into the Distance that's I think it's historical, but it's also set in a kind of non-time, and it's an epic, but a very short novel, a short epic. And then the later novel, Trust, is structurally fascinating. It's a novel within a novel within a novel, and that's very much rooted in this specific historic period. And I'm in awe of people who can write in such different ways, and yet really as if they're writing very authentically in both. It's not like trying on an outfit that you would never normally wear.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think like Trust for me was probably my favorite book that year. I thought it was so singular and just like very like it's a bold move, isn't it, to write a book like that?
It is. It's because of the fact that the first quarter of the book is almost off-putting. The style of it is very dry, and the payoff in that book really comes in the second half, even in the last quarter. So I just hate to think of readers who gave up because of the style, because it is a punt.
So your style is very, very different from that, though. And as Hernan says, that is both gripping and relentlessly funny, which I agree with. So maybe I wanted to ask a little bit about how you use humor in your novels. Is that like, when you write your novels, do you usually try to be funny, or does it like organically just sort of happen?
Oh, well, that's very kind. No, I'm the unfunniest of my family members.
Really?
Yes, very, and so I think that I know this about myself. So I write, I think, partly to have senses of humor that are grander and greater than my own, and to get to spend time with people who are more interesting than I find myself. And especially with this novel, because I was writing it partly during COVID, I just wanted there to be some joy on every page, and there to be to really center the way that these four women see the world, and to acknowledge that the sense of humor that each of them have, which is quite distinctive, equips them in a way that I think nothing else can equip you. And I think it's our best trait as a species, our sense of humor. Other people rate community and resilience, and you're
all about the funny.
I'm all about that.
So your book is about these four sisters, Olwen, Nell, Maeva and Rona, right?
Yeah.
And by the start of the novel, Olwen sort of disappears and goes to this like remote bungalow in the middle of nowhere. And then the three sisters, the three other sisters sort of rally to find her. And both of our novels actually feature campuses quite a lot and narrators who are perhaps something like natural-born students. And in fact, all the four sisters in your novel have doctorates in quite widely different fields. And it made me wonder, what significance does academic success have to these four characters and to the story as a whole?
Yeah, the novel has four sisters who all have PhDs and none of them have husbands. This was definitely something that I was doing to make myself laugh. I just thought, how to make my publishers break up with me in one sentence. But also in all seriousness, I suppose we are living at a time where there's a huge systemic attack on the sciences and the humanities. Expertise in general is under very, very serious attack. Through funding cuts, through completely perverse subsidies, through big oil and big ag, and and also just a general macho culture of kind of anti-intellectualism. So that wasn't in my mind when I started writing the novel. I tend to not like to know anything at all. I like to go completely into the dark with the novel and follow a character or follow some impulse. And the impulse was a geologist, Olwen. And she's teaching, when I first met her, she was teaching a group of students about the collapse of deep time, where processes that should take place over millennia are happening over decades. And my partner is an environmental scientist, so I guess I tried not to write this novel for a long time, because I realized I'd be writing about what it is to do that work and to love someone who does that work, because you see something that the public doesn't get to see, and you also see how many times in a day someone is asked, "Do you have hope?" Which I think your average Joe doesn't expect to be asked, on a Monday.
Yeah.
And because Olwen's always been in that position of having to project optimism and having to be buoyant, we're meeting her at a time when she just can't keep using that muscle that and so we're meeting her when she needs to actually acknowledge, how she is herself. And she takes off on her bicycle in the middle of the night and tells her loved ones, "Don't try and find me." So that's the kind of instigation of the story, and where her journey goes in terms of hope and how what she wants to do with her life and with her work, and how her family are going to deal with her. All of that I'd like to kind of leave up to the reader to go on that journey. But it starts in a campus, and I think that felt really appropriate, because it does feel like a very electric environment right now. And I wondered with your novel, it is a coming of age, and I think that's how it's being described. But the majority of the novel takes place while Sikan, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Sort of, yeah.
Oh, go on, tell me how you...
Sikan.
How Sikan is, how she's moving, how she's understanding the world through that space, both through how you engage academically, what you're coming to a campus with in terms of a worldview, in terms of your openness about your own background or the baggage that you have, the pathologies that you've developed. And it's where all of your life stuff, really escalates, where you're deciding on what sorts of people you want to spend time with and who you want to be influenced by. So were you tempted at one point to kind of make it exclusively a campus novel, or was that just a by the way?
It's funny because like both those terms, like campus novel and coming of age story, I never thought about that like as applicable to this novel while I was writing it. I feel like, I'm not sure if you agree, but I often feel like the way we come to discuss our novels and explain them, even when we're talking about in interviews, talking about the first idea we had for it, or what the inception of this idea was, I'm wondering how much of that is like self mythologizing? Like, are we making this up afterwards because it sounds very clever? I have like, you know, I can remember some like early ideas for this novel, but I'm the opposite of you. I'm a person who structures my novel before I sit down to draft. But just because I have the structure and the characters and like the sort of main crux of the novel in my head, I don't think I tend to like think of it as a genre or a type of story, or sort of how, like, which themes will be picked up later and that I will be sitting here now discussing. So for me, it was never a campus novel or a coming of age story when I was writing it. It was just a character portrait. I think I'm just a portrayist. Like, I just love really getting to know and talk about characters and finding out why they behave the way they do and what makes them tick. I never...
But the title gives it, and then do you come up with the title at the beginning, or do you have that afterwards?
This title, What a Time to Be Alive, I had before. Like, it was very early. It was just on when I was like usually I have like a few months or even a few years where I just like will ruminate on something and steep an idea before I sit down to structure it. And I had this title in mind when I was just like walking around listening to music in you know, Hyde Park or wherever in London, and just like coming up with ideas. I think like that's usually how I do it when I come up with ideas for novels, is that I tend to try to steep and mull over something. I think of my novels, you know, the finished product, I think of it not as cabbage but as kimchi. Like, it has to like have been like fermented in me for a long time. And that's why I don't like, again, the opposite of you, I don't like writing about this exact moment that we're living in, or the exact feelings, emotions, or like struggles that I'm dealing with at the time. I usually want my novels to have been like, for example, writing about Stockholm in this book. I haven't lived in Stockholm for over a decade, and I think like that's kind of like a sweet spot for me. Something that happened more than 10 years ago, or a place I visited 10 years ago. It has like steeped long enough inside of me to like then feel like it's fertile enough to write about, if that makes sense. That
makes a lot of sense. And, you know, I guess I never really thought about when it's set, because it feels like it's set now.
It could be. I don't have a year for it.
Yeah.
It's a timeless. It's a completely like outside of time novel, I would say. I mean, they do use mobile phones in this, so it's not the 60s.
No. And you can tell, I suppose, by the way that they think about their freedoms, especially the women's freedoms, and the way the female friendships. And the female friendship is the other thing that this novel is about, and is so rewarding in how unusual it is. I think the relationship between Sikan and Hannah, and I suppose at the beginning, Hannah seems like a foil that Sikan is trying to understand herself via, and she's simultaneously in admiration of Hannah, but also a bit repulsed by aspects of her. And I love how the novel allows that to be complicated and messy, and it doesn't try to moralize. I think that is so many novels would have pulled their punch there. And I suppose that's so central to how Sikan is struggling to be in the world, but also really desperately wants to be. The what a time to be alive isn't kind of a dismissive negative thing. It's also a joyous, grateful, there's a tone of gratitude about the title.
And I think that really, actually, exactly what you said now just encapsulate the sort of through line mood of the novel, where it's quite ambivalent, where, you know, it's quite a sad book. Like, there's a lot of sadness in there, and some quite difficult traumatic experiences, which would make the title sound ironic, like, oh, what a time to be alive, almost like a sigh. But there's the other aspect of that is like, Sikan as a character is like extremely optimistic. She has something like in her core which just like makes her not give up. She's just like so adamant to have a good life that even when life is really like, you know, hitting her quite hard, she just gets up, dusts herself off, and continues on like trying to figure out a way to live which is better than, you know, what her life has been so far, because she has had a very difficult childhood. So I think in that sense, if you look at who Sikan is as a character, she would actually say that phrase with optimism and joy and gratefulness. So yeah, I think, and I think that's why I really why I stuck with this title is because it could have so many meanings depending on the tone you use when you say it.
Yeah, I'm curious as to how it would land in Sweden as opposed to here. And maybe just on that point, I'm so curious. I presume you write in English. It reads like it was written in English. I'd love to know why you don't write in Swedish. And would you, consider writing in Swedish and then translating into English? What effect do you think that would have on the writing? I know what I've taught in the past, and people have very strong associations with their mother tongue. They, will describe like, oh, I can't write in Spanish because it's too emotional. And you realize that that's an association of your childhood or your upbringing with the language. So there can be all these psychosocial aspects to it too.
That's true. I never thought about it that way. I think like for me, I think my brain works very differently, like brain to mouth versus brain to fingers. So like when I'm writing with my fingers, my English is my first language. Like when I plot a novel or think about a scene, I will think about it in English. And I've always written, of course, when I was younger, I was writing, the adolescent short story. I was writing in Swedish, but otherwise I've always been writing in English, and that's how I think my creative brain now works. I don't think I mean, it would have to take some retraining to be able to write in Swedish at this level. But, another aspect of that is like the English language is 10 times larger than the Swedish one if you just look at like the amount of words. So like a Swedish dictionary is like a slim little thing, which means that like it's a much more nuanced, English is a much more nuanced language. But I think another thing that I find really interesting about this is like I'm quite an audacious writer in the sense that I don't really care about grammar. I don't think grammar has intrinsic value. I only think grammar has value if it makes the text more easily understandable to people. So if I can write in a grammatically incorrect way that is still understandable to the reader, then I enjoy doing that. If it makes the novel more voicey or better or more moody, or just gives a bit more personality to the characters. So I think because I'm writing in my second language, I'm sort of allowed to be much like more disrespectful to the language. I'm chopping it up and putting it back together in a way that just pleases me. Which I think if I had been to, gone to school in England, learning English as a native speaker, and then maybe gone to university as well, I think there would be so much shame in doing that, or like almost feeling like it's a taboo thing to do. Whereas I feel like I'm quite free to hammer the language as I please. Sort of.
That's so good. That's so great, and I think that's really quite rare. You must have been quite lucky that you didn't have editors that wanted to interfere with that. Like just off the top of my head, I can remember. And it's very much a Sikan thing, I think. She'd say, I extremely don't want to do that, rather than I definitely don't want to do that. But, it doesn't track grammatically, but it really tracks emotionally. Like that you think, I extremely, like I extremely don't want to. And that the extremely is the part that comes into your brain. So naturally it's the part that should come out. And I feel like Irish writers take a lot of license in, because they're often being edited in London, they play that card quite a lot of like, this is Irish English, don't you dare.
Yeah, it's great. Sometimes my editors would be like, I've had two different editors, and sometimes they would be like, Jenny, is this a Swedishism? And usually it's not. Usually it's just something that I came up with, but I'm always like, yeah, it sort of is. Especially like this book, since it's set in Sweden, it's I think I'm extremely allowed to do a bit as I please. But I was also wondering about this for you, because even though you write in your native language, you do live in London, and you work with both American and British editors, but you are from Ireland, and you also spend quite a lot of time abroad. So I'm wondering if your time abroad has sort of informed your writing, or if working with like American and British editors as I assume your primary editors?
Yes, yeah. I lived in New Zealand for 7 years, and in the Netherlands for 7 years, and the US for a year, and I've bounced around quite a lot. And I'm from the Republic of Ireland, but I studied in the North for 5 years. So off the bat, my English has been complicated, and even down to my spelling now, it is a kind of a headache for an editor. But I think that that's ultimately how you end up having a voice. It's informed by your unique combination of experiences and your unique interaction with different cultures and different sensibilities and different worldviews and different senses of humor. And so I think it's definitely affected my writing. My first book was a poetry book, and the book had to be published extra wide, and it was really, I think, because I was a prose writer and I didn't know it yet. But I remember someone saying to me, like, they said, "Oh, did you do an MFA?" I said no, and I kind of explained my itinerary, my life itinerary to date, and they said, like, well, keep doing what you're doing, and don't stay long enough anywhere that you adapt to the mode of writing in that place. And it was just nice to kind of hear, because I had already become aware that I wasn't really writing in a very typically Irish way, but I was undoubtedly or undeniably Irish. So yeah, this is all just to say, yes, it's definitely impacted the work from a sentence level, but also very much from a worldview level. Like, I wrote a short story once about, and it was published, but it was probably quite hard for people, because for me it was just like everyday life. So it was about a Finnish woman who lived above it's a long time since I wrote or read that story. I think a Hungarian neighbor downstairs, and she was going on a business trip to Singapore during the short story, and they lived in the Netherlands. So it was that is very typical in the Netherlands. First, you have a Boven house, a Beneden, so that people live in very close proximity, and you're often people who are from very different backgrounds or different cultures, and so that's discombobulating to, like, I don't know, someone from Iowa who's never left the US, but from someone who's lived in somewhere like the Netherlands, the most densely populated part of Europe, it's just so normal. And so to even think about, writing a story like that comes from where you've lived and what becomes normal to you. I definitely wouldn't have written something like that as a curio. In fact, I tried to make it simpler. It's like, what if she at least was Irish? Like, what if at least her neighbors downstairs were English, or she doesn't go to Singapore, like she, but actually it just became the truth of the story, and I couldn't unsee it.
So do you feel similar to me then, that your living abroad has made you feel a little bit freer and a little bit less sort of that you feel like you're kind of supposed to stay within your track, if that makes sense?
Yeah, thankfully in Ireland, I don't think there's very much of that. I do think that there's a really good literacy rate in Ireland. People do read a lot, and people want to read surprising work, and that's something that's really galvanizing and bolstering in Ireland. And I think why there's a good culture of reading one another's work is people want to read a really good book that they haven't read before, and so there's not so much of a stay within your lane mentality, but I'm sure that that's true of some countries.
And I think, like, I know we've talked about this before, you and me, that, like, both as a writer and a reader, I know that you find that voice is one of the most exciting things about both reading and writing. And I want to talk to you about your writing style and your voice, because it is extraordinarily unique and very you. It doesn't feel like anything else that I've ever read. It has like a straightforwardness to it, and I find that it like beautifully balances like a specific type of crispness with both humor and quite a lot of anger as well. And to me, it's just like ceaselessly surprising, and that makes it a joy for me to read. I always love, when you read a sentence that takes off in an unexpected direction from where you think it was going, and that you do that so well and so often. Like, so many of your sentences are like this. So, like this paragraph, for example, I want to read an example for you. Sometimes she forgets masturbation is an option. She gives it a go, trying to let the craving for a lemon and rosemary scone be subsumed by the craving for a tongue to her sternum, while a hand has her as assuredly as a favorite bowling ball. She likes to be held in the balance, then thrown. She likes to be sampled in unoriginal ways. So how would you, it made me wonder, reading something like this, how would you yourself describe your style, or sort of what you're aiming to do on a sentence level?
I love that you picked out that little bit. I felt kind of guilty writing it, because there's very little sex in the novel, and unfortunately, because I do love writing sex, but it's four sisters and they're in the country, you know, so it's not Sex in the City. So there's this one masturbation scene, and I just remember being like disappointed that at the reality of what the masturbation was like, because I think there's something like the orgasm is something like she describes it like a pithy hard BBC hard talk like conclusion, you know. Like, okay, it definitely happened, but was it worth it? Anyway, so I don't set out to write a certain way. I will say that usually my feeling of when I'm ready to write a novel is when I've locked into something of the tone of the book. And that can take a really long time. And I don't sit down writing sentences.
Do you mean, so you write yourself into the tone, or do you mean you do this like just in your head?
I kind of, it sounds very woo woo. I like feel a sudden sense that I'm ready to sit down and write a sentence, and that I'll know that if it's the first sentence of the book. And sometimes it's not one sentence, it's three. So the opening sentences to this book, if I remember right, are: the air is mild for October, nothing shivers, nothing smokes. A gentle westerly whistles at the panes of the lab windows like an unwelcome uncle, determined to raise the hairs on some young neck.
Now, I can't believe you remember that. Like,
well, it's because when I wrote those lines, I was like, okay, now I know Alwyn. And now maybe I have a novel, you know? And of course I doubted for another 2 years. I doubted the whole way through. I'm horrendous to be around. But it's because for me, the sentences are the characters. And so you have in that, you know, you have the reality of the situation that she's in, you know, the air is mild for October, so the weather's off. So that's appropriate to her, you know, nothing shivers, nothing smokes. Well, you can read that different ways. You can say no one is frightened enough, nothing is burning, or, you know, it's obviously burning. And then the humor of, you know, a gentle westerly whistles at the panes of the lab windows. Like, you think of a lab as being something, it's quite hard to think of being something being seductive like that. But then it's like an unwelcome uncle, and who's determined to, you know, raise the hairs on some young necks. And it was a some young necks because she's very monosyllabic. And so I don't know, there's something about the sense of humor, all of that. So for me, that's what sentences allow me to do, is to find a character, and in finding a character, to find a novel.
I think there's something you do really well, because, you know, sometimes with very voicey writers, it could almost feels like, okay, here comes the author flexing a muscle, right? You can tell that it's the author coming in and writing a beautiful sentence for us, like something very poetic. But the way you do it is that it's always so rooted in the characters that, like, when your sentences or a paragraph becomes poetic, it feels still very natural and organic, and it doesn't feel like you come in and, you know, you show us, you kind of try to flash us a bit, you know what I mean?
Hopefully not. Well, it's my fourth book, and I think you get, you know, I think that you get a little bit more critical of your previous work, and you start to try and get out of your way more. And that is one of the, nothing gets easier about writing novels except, you know, that aspect, and also knowing that you did it before, that helps. I also find that self-editing gets much easier. Like, you can sort of hear your editors whispering in your ear when you edit yourself, like what, like, and you sort of I think it's easy, like with every, I mean, I've only written 2 books, I'm working on my third, so I'm still very much an amateur, but I feel like I pick out things that I wouldn't have been able to with my first book. Interesting. And the style is very, very distinctive in your book as well. It's not first person, but you feel like you've read a first person novel.
Oh, it is first person.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
So you have read a first person novel.
Gosh, that's amazing in my mind, because you're just like, you're slightly, you know, you're seeing the whole thing in a way. That's mad. That's completely. I was rereading it like in the last several days. So,
but my agent calls it that it feels like watching someone through a webcam reading my novels. Like, you're kind of spying on someone, like, very intimately.
Yeah. So seeing it through a webcam makes me feel like something is happening that you don't get to see, around, like, are they wearing pants? but I think like the novel is so generous, to the point where I feel like it's what a lot of contemporary literature is being too shy or too cowardly, to put it really brutally, to do, which is to portray someone as they are, not as how they should be. And that's part of it. That's related to the journey of the novel, so it's really important. So there's aspects of the voice that are, I've talked about it as being minimalist, but it's also maximalist.
In what sense do you think?
In the sense that the smallest detail can be an existential, can have to do with the whole trajectory of her life, or the way that she understands her history and her pathologies. So there's a lot of potential. I think she because of her perspective, she doesn't take anything for granted. And that means that's what feels maximalist about it. But I suppose stylistically there is something that's quite calm, maybe is a better word than minimalist. I'm curious as to whether you feel that's something that is true of Swedish literature, or is this something that's more true to you? Because I know that you're interested in minimalism, and as far as I understand, it isn't in the kind of Marie Kondo sense. It's having also to do with fewer possessions. Is that right?
Well, so for your first question about if I feel like my style is a typically like Swedish style, I wouldn't be able to answer that, because ever since I was 12, I kind of stopped reading Swedish books, because I think literature for me has always been like about the curiosity of like experiencing other worlds. So I think I read maybe one Swedish book per year or every 3 years. So I don't really know what's going on in Sweden with writing styles. So I think maybe I have something from my childhood or background that seeps into my voice or my style. Probably I do. But I think about it being minimalist or calm, I think that's I think it's something that definitely came with like the mother's milk for me growing up. I consider myself being a minimalist, like broadly in life, like sort of almost like the way that I look at the world is a way. I look at minimalism as sort of about prioritizing. So for me, it's not about like how many things I own, or how like clearing out my wardrobe or whatever, although I do love a clear out, I have to say. No, for me it's more about like I think the world is so large and we have so many options all the time. It's like one of the strange things about our generation, right? That there's so much available to us that if you have a very overactive, sensitive brain, it becomes way too much to handle. The world is very loud and there are so many options. So I feel like for me it's more about like minimalism as a way to figure out who I am and what I want, and then simplify everything else. So basically about deciding what to discard or omit from my life, or like which things to not spend energy on or time on. And I think I definitely do that in my writing as well. I love like going through my text and like pruning and like polishing is the most favorite thing during the writing process for me. So I do hear that my prose comes off as like crystalline or crisp or that kind of thing, and I think that is also the type of prose that I love reading myself. I don't tend to go for the very lyrical, poetic, or very like flowery type of prose or maximalist prose. I do love the very
avoid my first two novels.
Oh really? Is that true? I find it hard to believe after reading and loving the alternatives, because that is quite like, it's quite crisp, like, and it's quite like blunt. And yeah, I never felt like it.
I don't know. I have no perspective on my own work.
I think it's like you remember you once told me that because I was like, oh, I'm writing my third novel now, and it's quite different in style. And you were like, I'm assuring you that if I read like that one, I will still be able to say like, oh, this is a Jenny Mustard novel, and like probably it's just like the reader themselves. They feel like we take these like huge leaps and bounds, and then like for everyone else it's like, you know, my partner David, when he read the first draft of my third novel, I was like, what do you think? He's like, yeah, it's a Jenny Mustard novel. I'm like, shoot. I thought I would have like taken it felt like I had taken like a huge step forward in my prose and my abilities, but apparently not.
And that can be true on how you put a sentence down on the page level, but also on a what are your kind of mega themes level, and you think that you're writing a different story and you discover it's the same.
It's the same. For me, I think the one like theme that I will, like the terrain that I will continue to like just walk in my books is it's just the paradox that I find that I myself as a person can't really parse or like get to grips with. And that is that like the world is so extremely violent and awful and atrocious and ugly at the same time as being so tender and soft and beautiful at the same time. I don't understand how we can exist on these two planes at the same time.
Well, I want to ask you about that in relation to this book, because, you know, the personal is always political, and while you know, What a Time to Be Alive is, you know, as we said, like a story about female friendship and a coming of age, and Sikan has had at least one very traumatic experience in her youth, which she doesn't seem to have talked to anyone about, and it's such a well-measured aspect of the story and her character in terms of the writing, I thought, because it's exactly the sort of experience that could leave a person feeling that it's too small a trauma to need to deal with, but it's also the type of experience that can affect someone for the rest of their life. So I think it's very interesting the way that you handle the claustrophobia of loneliness, and especially kind of manufactured loneliness, and it's your perspective on this is very unique, I think, because you're a writer and creator who deals with or has a complicated, let's say, sophisticated relationship to an audience who you're often not meeting in real life, but who are a community. And so were those, you know, were you aware at some point through writing this novel that you were squaring up to that? Because that feels like a parallel, the two sides of the same coin, the loneliness and community side, and what you were talking about, the violence and tenderness of the world.
So yes, this is another scene where Sikan is, I think she's 13, and she goes on a school trip and sort of gets lost from the group and has to like basically spend the night trying to figure things out by herself in a town that's not her own town, because she can't really rely on her parents to help her. So basically Sikan is an only child, and she grew up with like parents who, they do their best, but they are not fitted to be parents because they are so emotionally unavailable, but they're also quite, you know, they sort of see her almost as an adult that can take care of herself, even though when she's not. So you know, in this scene, she meets an adult man when she's 13 who offers to help her. He takes her to his apartment and lets her recharge her phone so she can, you know, call her parents and have them come pick her up. But then, you know, things escalate a little bit, and I think, you know, for me writing this character, I was interested in portraying sort of all aspects of, first of all, girlhood, and then later on when she's in her 20s, like young womanhood, both from the joyful aspects of it, like her relationship with her new best friend Hannah, her first time having sex, which is a joyful experience for her, but also it didn't feel honest to only portray sex in a joyful way. I wanted to create a world for her where she can enjoy having sex and not be punished for it, because it feels like women who enjoy sex in literature or in films, they usually sooner or later get punished for it. So I wanted it to be like a lot of it, like enjoyable, great sex. It's a lot of sex in this book, I have to say, but it didn't feel honest to only portray the joyful bits of you know, being a young woman having basically sex with strangers. So there are some more like darker moments there. I don't know any like woman in my generation or younger who hasn't been, subject to sexual assault or sexual harassment. So I think it needed to be portrayed. So I do that a couple of times in this book as well. But as you say, it's never like nothing large enough happens for it to be something that you would have to deal with or speak about. And I think that's so common. I think that's like how most women react to these kind of things, where we sort of think of ourselves as strong enough, we can handle this by ourselves, we don't need to make a big deal out of this, it happens to everyone, and just sort of we normalize it in our own minds, thinking that this is just part of the female experience, right? And I think it is. And I think it is normal. I think it happens to everyone. And it doesn't have to become a thing in your life that takes over or ruins you. But it's still like a very tough thing to have happened to you. And knowing that more or less every single woman you meet on the street will have had a similar experience, it's daunting to think about. And I do think that these things create... like you very beautifully call, like a manufactured loneliness, where we create these walls to sort of not be seen as victims or like victimize ourselves, and like both like outwardly to other people, but I think like even more so when it comes to our identity and the way that we look at ourselves. We don't want to look at ourselves as being victims. And Sikan has been bullied her whole childhood as well. She's been completely ostracized by her peers. So that's another aspect of her life where she has been a victim, but she never thinks about it that way. And she would rather take the blame for it herself and see it as something that she has done wrong that made her deserve being picked on.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is sort of the driving force through the novel. Like she's almost going on a quest to sort of leave this old, tragic, like socially awkward girl behind and become like a well-liked, socially adept woman. But she has communication problems. Like she's very bad at communicating, and growing up like an only child with these parents who are also very socially awkward, it hasn't really helped her. So it's a journey for her for sure. And I was thinking about this about your novel as well, because I feel like Sikan goes from being an offbeat, eccentric character who tries her best to fit in and learn how to communicate and learn how to speak in a more like palatable way to other humans, with like euphemisms and like knowing sort of like class cultural indicators and learning how to be like less honest basically. And I feel like Alvin, her driving force throughout this novel, she also goes on a quest, but she does the opposite.
She does come to acknowledge and admit that it has come at a huge cost to her to have had to be buoyant and to project optimism. Because one of the problems with working in anything to do with climate change, which she does as an earth scientist, is that the pressure is on you to prove that there's a way out. There's a way out of the hole that we've dug ourselves. The pressure, you literally will get more time with the media, with MPs, if you give positive talking points. So, the idea that you have no choice as, say, a climate scientist to speak the truth, which isn't to say we're all doomed, which is to say this trajectory that we're on is doomed. And to really make it clear how bad it is, and how every kind of month that we don't act on it to change the trajectory, how much worse the trajectory gets. The fact that it's taken until 2025, I think really this decade, for any scientists to be able to even voice that is so painful. And science is inherently conservative by nature. Everything has to be proved to such a rigorous degree, and experiments have to be repeated and repeatable. So by nature they're conservative, so they've underestimated everything. And already underestimations are extremely bad. So when you're constantly calibrating what truth you can speak, in order to bear in mind how someone else is or how much time they'll give you, or what mental state they might be in. It's a lot. It's a very big burden, and she needs a moment to not have to do that at all, not even to herself. She needs to almost look at the demons, because you know, she's become so trained to constantly be performing that calibration, so in a very simple way, she needs to take care of herself, and also she needs care from others. And it is a novel about care. I think that's,
and I think like the very final scene in the book is one of my favorite parts of the book. It came as such a surprise. I'm not going to spoil it, but it came as such a surprise, and I felt like it was a very beautiful, hopeful, but still felt very honest ending. Because when I was reading it, I was wondering, how will she end this novel? Like
I was wondering that too.
Yes.
until the night before. Well, no, not even the night before. Until the morning of, I wrote the last like 3 or 4 pages, and kind of I was in Northern Ireland. I had done an event at the Seamus Heaney home place, and so I was staying in this kind of poets B&B. And then I left there. I stayed there. I was like, can I stay in the room for extra? You know, and then after they booted me out, I went to the library. And then after they booted me out, I went to an ice cream shop. And I was writing the last, like, just sitting with this massive tub of like melted ice cream every so often, every couple of hours, going up and telling the people who work there, I'm really sorry, I'm just finishing my book.
Oh, that's such a good story. I feel like this could be a short story in itself. Speaking about writing a book within a book, sort of.
Yeah, and so the payoff of, like, I suppose, kind of the way that I write kind of in one draft is that it is all unknown, but when you see it, you know that it's right. And I really didn't know until the night before. I really thought I had a very different ending that had arrived in my brain. And I thought that might be right, but I just woke up and it didn't feel right. And I just thought I have to just go and see what I see. So yeah, it's a very ecstatic period, the end of a book for me. I don't know whether you have that or...
Yeah, I'm the same.
Yeah.
It feels like it's snowballing, right? Like it's going fast and fast and becoming bigger and bigger. And after a while, you're there for the ride. You like, I feel like you're not really making any decisions anymore. You sort of, you know, it's already, your decisions are already been made. You know, you just have to follow through, sort of. So speaking of the structure of your novel, you're quite playful with format. I feel like, you know, the main example of this is, of course, the 2 parts in your novel where you, instead of writing it in like a straightforward prose, you sort of write it as a play script. Instead, is that what it's called? A play script. Yeah. So, but I'm also thinking about how the text sort of visually appears on the page. You use italics, you use uppercase, you use bold text, as well as like font changes to indicate, you know, text messaging or written notes. And also, wonderfully, you use strike through text, which is not something that you often see in a novel. So, you know, is it important to you how text is visually experienced on the page? And also, what made you want to write parts of the novel in the format of the play? Was this always like a plan you had from the beginning, or an idea that occurred to you like more organically while you were drafting? So there's a lot of questions in one question.
It's a great question. So I guess partly I had the title The Alternatives from the start, and I was giving myself a license for the novel to be alternative. You know, at one point, so there are Zoom lectures in it, there's real life lectures, there's which again, like bestseller, here I come. There at one point there was a philosophy book for children that Nell was writing with that had to ultimately be boiled down. There's like 2 lines from it in the book. Yes, there's the play script. I didn't know that would happen until about 3 pages beforehand, but it happens in the book when the sisters, you know, spoiler alert, find Alwyn. I mean, it's pretty clear from the book jacket itself that they do find her. It's not that type of novel. So, but when they are arriving, you know, toward her, I saw it as a visual image, you know, and I won't spoil the aspects of that, but so for one thing, there was this kind of visual, quite theatrical kind of scene, and then also like what happens when big families come together. There's just so much talk
and talking over each other and like
exactly,
yeah.
And and also people trying to set the tone. I come from there's 5 kids in my family, and so I guess I'm really interested in those adult sibling dynamics, and the power dynamics that come with that, and so the play script was a way for me to, first of all, let them talk that much, for me to get out of their way as as the writer. And I feel like because of where it happens, I hope where it happens in the novel, for the reader, it should be something like, you've heard about your in-laws for years and years. You're finally meeting them. You've been told all the lore. You've been told, the subtext and what people are not going to want to talk about, and where they'll try and steer your attention, towards the hydrangeas. Not in this novel, but and so I felt like that was a really cool position for the reader to be in at that point, if they are, hopefully. And so that then they get some kind of reward by not needing the explanation. They don't need to hear the subtext or the analysis. It's or kind of any modulation. They know what even the pacing of this would be. I tried to manipulate that a little bit through kind of stage directions, and but it was really fun, and also it allowed the novel to be the length that it is, which I hope is an appropriate page count for the scope of the novel, which is always one of those. It's like if a sculptor were to make something, 2 feet tall that should have been like 12 centimeters tall, that you have that problem with a novel as well, that you can have the wrong mass for the scope.
Yeah.
And I was worried that would happen. So as soon as the option of writing it as a play script arrived, that solved that problem.
And I think also another interesting aspect of this is like you have these they're basically 4 main characters that you like get to know really well, and they're very distinct. So by the time you read them like this, you feel like you know them already, and this is a way to not make one single character own the scene. It's like it becomes a very democratic way of looking at their dynamic, and the only thing we get to see is what they say. So we can't judge anyone by their interior monologue. We can only see like what they present to the other sisters, which makes it very interesting, because we have to like read the subtext ourselves, and we have to interpret, and I'm sure that every reader will interpret these dynamics differently depending on what kind of history we have ourselves and what kind of relationships we have. So I find it really courageous, and also it's refreshing when an author trusts their reader this way to like enjoy and do the maths and bring themselves into the text. So I found it wonderful, and also I loved how like you just breeze through those parts. Like you can just you don't want to put them down, so you sort of inhale them in one sitting.
Oh, thank you. That's really good to hear. Yeah. There's also that torture, isn't it, where people say what they don't really mean, or they can't really quite say what they mean, hopefully at that point, because the reader should know the characters quite well by having spent time with them, they'll be able to see that too, and they'll be frustrated with them, or feel their pain, or and that I suppose that idea of like reading one another and calibrating what you say is so central to What a Time to Be Alive. So there's a big question in the book about normalcy. We talked about Sikan wanting to almost pretend that she didn't have the upbringing that she has, and to reinvent herself. And part of the reinvention is to understand what's normal. And then, what's beautiful, which is why the relationship with Hannah is so wonderful, because Hannah isn't normal. But ultimately, I think Sikan comes to appreciate her beauty. And so related to that, the kind of outsiderness of, I think, both of the characters, I wondered if you were thinking about neurodivergence at all. When I reread the book, I noticed that early on, in the scene depicting Sikan and Hannah when they're both studying in a lecture, and I'll read a little passage to show what I mean. So It was a cyber psychology lecture about developers mostly creating services with only able-bodied users in mind, but how in recent years more effort had been put into disability-proofing apps. Like people with colour blindness, carpal tunnel syndrome, autism, how will they interact with the app? Conrad said. Actually, if there are any dyslexic or partially paralysed or bipolar students in this class, you should put it on your CV for added value. I couldn't make up my mind if him saying this was despicably cynical or, quite the contrary, apt and compassionate. That's Sikhan. So, yeah, some aspects of the story seem to touch on neurodivergence to me, decoding modes of communication, like vaguenesses, trying to parse class indicators, and focusing on the gap between what people mean and what they say. And then in the novel, Sikhan goes from being a coder, which, you know, is kind of a funny analogy there, to writing down people's conversations that she hears in cafes and exaggerating aspects of them, like the cliches, until they become absurd. And she almost becomes a writer herself in doing that. I'm curious as to your responses to this. Did this occur to you through the writing, that it might be read in this way? And also, I'm curious as to the journey with Sikhan and her writing.
So this is such an interesting question. It's the first time I've been asked this question in an interview. Although I have to say that people have been messaging me online about this quite a lot ever since the book has only been out for 6 weeks or something. But I've already gotten quite a few DMs thanking me for, you know, writing the autistic experience. And also I've noticed online that I've sometimes been referred to as a neurodivergent author, which I'm not. I mean, not to my knowledge anyway. I think that I'm, in a lot of ways, I'm on the other end of the spectrum. And this is something that an aspect of Sikhan's character that I don't share. Like, I've never had problems communicating easily, and I don't have problems sort of adapting my way of communicating depending on the room I'm in. If anything, I think I have too many what are they called, those mirror neurons, that makes you cry if someone cries, smile if someone smiles, that kind of thing. I have a very animated face. So Sikhan and I are not similar in that sense at all, even though I recognize myself in her struggle to sort of balance being eccentric with the will to the urge to wanting to be well liked and adored by everyone. So I think, on the other hand, I've also had a lot of people telling me that they relate to her a lot. I was a bit worried about this when I was writing her, because she is a little bit of an offbeat character. And I was wondering how people would relate to her, if they would more see her as a conundrum or, an eccentric character. But it seems like, neurodivergent people really relate to her, but people who are not neurodivergent also really relate to her. So I think maybe it's just a sense of her struggles and the things that the doubts that she feels on a daily basis is quite universal. And I think obviously more if you are neurodivergent, because if the majority of people communicate in one way and you don't, of course it makes you feel more like an outsider. But I think it's quite universal to feel as an outsider in different times in our lives.
And she doesn't seem to berate herself deeply. She doesn't seem to experience a lot of self-loathing for the ways that she struggles. And it's more a process.
Yes, I think so. And for her, which is another thing that I personally relate to, is that I feel like she has a sort of an inclination to present herself honestly. She's an honest person, but I don't mean in the sense that she speaks honestly about other people or about situations. I think for her it's more about she has an urge to show who she is all the time. And almost in every dialogue scene in this book, I feel like she says or does something very blunt or honest that people maybe normally wouldn't say, which make the dialogues a joy to write. And I think I do that as well. I'm quite a blunt person. I get away with it here because I can just say that it's because I'm Swedish. But in Sweden, I'm also quite blunt, I think. But I think my job as a writer is not to diagnose my characters unless the diagnosis is important to the story. So otherwise, I just wouldn't. And I have no idea if Sikan is neurodivergent or not. It's not my job to say. I think that what's interesting to me is just to find a character. She showed up one day when I was writing. I was writing a short story and she just showed up, and I loved her. So I just wanted to write a novel about her and portray her as honestly as I could, like words and all. And I think she is the most beautiful soul that I would probably ever write, because she has this aspect of being so extremely honest. And I think one of the saddest things about this novel is that she actually like goes on this journey to try to be less honest and try to be more like normal people are, the way that we are taught to like not show ourselves honestly, and like not wanting to look at other people with honesty as well, or like encourage other people to present themselves with honesty. Like we're almost encouraging this sense of vagueness, or veiling ourselves.
Yeah.
Is it called
veiling?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the really interesting aspects of the book, because even though now we've established it's first person, I'm still not going to argue with it. She doesn't censor her own. She doesn't censor her own thoughts, and so there's always an interesting thing if you're writing in first person. You wonder who the narrative is being written to, and I don't know if you thought about that when you were writing the book.
For me, I think like I never think of narration as written. I just think of it as thought more, as something that's very it's not permanent.
That makes a lot of sense for the fact that it doesn't feel like she's censored herself. So for example, she might look at Hannah or and hate the way that Hannah has done something, just how she's been in her body or in her clothes, or how she's been, or hate her seeing her mother standing outside of the car looking a certain way. So she does make a lot of judgments about other people, ultimately wishing that they would be more invisible or more acclimatized. And the narrative doesn't punish her for that, and I think that's what is becoming rarer and rarer, because there's such scrutiny on female characters to be heroines in a classical sense,
and politically correct, I think, as well.
Yeah,
because we get like I feel like I've already gotten critique for this, for like her being like criticizing the way Hannah looks, for example, which I knew I would, but that's an honest depiction of who Sikan is, because Sikan is trying her best to, like, in any way she can, to fit in and not stand out. And I think it's a lot of projecting when it comes to how she looks at Hannah, because Hannah is someone who's eccentric but has embraced her eccentricity, which is both repelling and attractive to Sikan. And like that ambivalence is something that I was really interested in just diving deeper into, and see like what makes us attracted to people that we are also sort of repelled by at the same time.
Yeah, and I mean, you shouldn't, especially if you're trying to, if it isn't a first person narration that's for an audience, for example, like my second novel, The While After, you discover it's the only first person thing I've ever written, but you discover that he is sort of writing it as a sort of testimony, and so there is the narrative and the control of one's own story is an important aspect of the novel. So, but in this, that's not the case. And so if the writer themselves or the publishing community edit out that content that might have a range of reader responses, let's say, then the world of literature doesn't reflect the world as it is. And I think that that's what's really disturbing.
And also, I think that like one of the main reasons why I read is because it makes me look at myself differently after I read something that is very honest. And I think, this is actually something you told me a while back, which really stuck with me, where you just said like your main objective is just honesty, like being honest in your writing. you did, like, it was you who said that to me, right?
That's
It sounds like you. Okay, good. Because you looked at me now like you were surprised. I was like, maybe that wasn't Caoilinn, but yeah, okay, so it was you. Because I've always been thinking like, Caoilinn says to be honest, so I'm going to, like, I have that as, like, you know, your mentorship in my brain when I start chickening out when I'm writing and like, oh, maybe I'm going too far with like my honesty principles here. I'm like, no, Caoilinn told me to, so I'm like, I'm just gonna keep. I think we need to encourage each other, because we will get critiqued for it. We will get, you know, bad reviews when we write characters who aren't always attractive in the way that they're looking at the world. But who is? I'm not attractive if you spend time in my brain, I'm not attractive in that. Like, a lot of stuff happens that I'm not proud of in my own brain. And I think it's what makes literature exciting for me, when you get to see humanity from all angles. Which very nicely brings me to my last question to you, which is, I want to talk to you about a phenomenon that we have been discussing previously, but I want to delve deeper into it. And it's the phenomenon about likable and unlikable characters, like the pressure from the market, or like your own publishers. Do you feel like they're like, have you been warned about reader reactions, or like how critics will react to you?
I did experience, well, my first novel, it was reviewed really well and everything. It wasn't seen as being a flaw of the novel, but in some ways it was. Say let's say a positive review might have still described it as like a coming of age where the heroine doesn't learn anything or grow.
Okay.
Do
you agree with that?
It's not a coming of age. It's
okay.
a picaresque novel.
Right.
But there were very, very few picaresque novels with female leads that I had ever read. I went hunting for them, and I found it extremely difficult to find any. Which a picaresque is, a novel that follows a character moving through social strata. Basically moving through the world, throwing their ideas up against the wall to see what sticks. They're often trickster characters. They're not heroes or anti-heroes. And it's usually episodic in structure. So you have to be interested in the character, because the environment changes and other side characters aren't consistent. So I was writing a female-led picaresque, and that is already a very, very unlikely thing to do. We have like two classic examples: William Thackeray's Vanity Fair and Jane Austen's Emma, and both of those women are in pursuit of marriage, because there's no equivalent to the male picaresque. There has to be something to make it a woman's story, or something that can be identifiable as a sort of arrival at oneself. And I found that really depressing. And then what I discovered is that if you want to have a complicated, thorny female character, you often need to give her a trauma. And that, as in, this is what exists in our literature and in our films, to the extent that it's almost impossible to find examples without it. If there isn't a big trauma that's explaining why a female character is behaving poorly or not admirably, then the center of gravity of the novel is not about the woman. It is about her relationship with the man, or primarily, it's that. And so it just, since that was my first experience, it was a tough novel to publish first. I sort of wish I hadn't. My second novel, which follows a man, was much more liked. Was a lot easier of a novel to publish, but now the nice thing about publishing more books is that the highs are less high and the lows are less low. You become a bit more I suppose resilient about it, and you don't take it so personally, and you can kind of see it as being interesting as opposed to being any sort of attack on the book or on you, and so that's a positive thing. That's been my experience. Yeah, I felt like that's been my experience. It's
that's
interesting.
Lovely. It's not like I can't wait to publish my third book, if that's what it means.
Well, I can't wait for you to publish it either.
Well, what you were just talking about is interesting to me, because in my first novel, we have two narrators, and the female narrator, Sam, she is exactly that character who sometimes behaves quite poorly. She's quite selfish. She has a little bit of almost like an addiction problem, and she is very, very, irresponsible. And, she makes a point out of, when she's thinking about this and herself and why she's behaving this way, she makes a point out of, admitting to herself that there is no trauma, there is no reason. She is just the way she is because that who she is as a person. And I usually feel like, when we get those moments where something happened that sort of shaped someone or ruined someone, it feels, usually to me, feels way too neat, and like it does not feel like it's psychologically nuanced or interesting enough, because we are so complex that, like, how many of us have like an inciting incident in our lives where it's like, oh, this was a fork in the road that just changed everything. Very few of us will have like that moment. We will have a multitude of those moments and combine them, and that's what makes us us. And I think as you say, especially like because I'm child-free, and Sam, in my first novel, she realizes that she is going to be child-free as well. And again, that's also, whenever a child-free woman is portrayed in any form, in like TV, film, or literature, it's always about, a trauma or a reason or something that has made her either feel unfit to be a mother or actually be unfit to be a mother. And that's not, in my experience, that's not how child-free women look at themselves. Like, I am sure I would be a perfectly adequate mother if I wanted to. I just simply don't want to. There's no reason for it. And it's the same. It was the same with Sam in my, like, I wanted to talk about this, so I used Sam as a voice for this in my first novel. Yeah. But yeah, I feel like, I'm not sure if this is like some kind of internalized sexism, but I feel pressured to make sure that my female characters are, if not likable, then at least very understandable. Mm-hmm. That like I motivate their behavior, as like I really put effort into motivating their behavior so that you can understand why they are the way they are.
I guess there have been in the editing process for this book, there were a couple of extra requests, let's say, from an editor. Can you just let us in a little bit more as to why she does that? And I'm very open to doing that. What the larger umbrella issue here is that for the paperback, at least in the UK, they removed, the fact that the women have PhDs. It doesn't say anything about that on the copy, because ultimately that was deemed not that likable.
On the cover, you mean?
On the cover. And so not even their professions, not geologist, philosopher, political scientist, chef, which is what would make me pick up a book.
Definitely. Yeah.
And so then it just becomes about a woman who disappears and her sisters go and find her. Like that's a story, and that's in there, but it's not the only story. And so that's really disappointing that we still live in an age where a book about smart women is unappealing. A book about female professors is unappealing. Like there's a tradition of male books about professors that are a whole vibe.
And they usually have sex with one of their female students. At least one. No, and maybe that's a like testament to who I am as a reader. But you just mentioned earlier today that like neither of them have husbands, and I hadn't even realized when I was reading the book. I was like so uninterested in that aspect of their lives. I'm like, romance, who needs it? If you have a bit of masturbation in there, I'm all good.
The scone was real. It was a real scone.
It was a real scone. Have you had that scone? Have you?
Yes, it's the lemon poppy seed scone.
That sounds. Was it rosemary in there as well?
Oh, I think so. I can't remember.
It sounds quite delicious, actually.
I should have had that be a prop when the book was being published. Have the scone sent to everyone and they eat it, and then
or like at the launch party. That would have been lovely. This conversation was so enjoyable. I think we went on for quite a long time because we had a lot to talk about. And I just wanted to say a huge thank you for coming to my home and talking to me about your gorgeous book. It's out in paperback now, and everyone who hasn't read it, you need to read The Alternatives by Caoilinn Hughes. It's intelligent as hell, and it's also extremely enjoyable. So thank you for writing it.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and thank you, Jenny and David. And
David, the producer, is sitting here. So if you hear someone laughing once in a while, this is David laughing here.
And it's the real celebration here is What a Time to Be Alive, which is much more of a fresh baby, and also I think very fresh and authentic and very unique. And it might sound like there's a lot of very kind of archetypal experiences in the book, first love, first kiss, first best friend, first betrayal, first heartbreak. All of it just goes to show that those aren't really they're not experiences that are dulled by being universal. It's really, really beautiful book, and I think very summer vibes. So go and pick up a copy.
Thank you so much, Caoilinn. This has been a joy.
Thank you.